I didn't expect the scent of home to hit me this hard. The crisp Kansas air carried a familiar mix of freshly cut grass, fried food from the diner down the road, and that earthy smell that only came after a morning rain. But underneath all, that was something else. Memories. And they weren't all pleasant. I parked my car by the curb, staring at the familiar street where my life fell apart 6 years ago. I left this town like a man on fire, chasing any path that would take me as far away from Judy, from our house, from the betrayal. But now, I was back. Not by choice, really. My daughter Sarah had made sure of that. Dad, you promised you'd be there for me this season. Her voice had been firm over the phone, too grown up for a 10-year-old. I didn't have the heart to disappoint her. So here I was, back in this quiet little town, where everyone knew everyone's business. I stepped out of the car, my boots sinking slightly into the damp ground, and grabbed my bag from the trunk. It felt surreal to be standing here like I had been thrown into some twisted time loop. Everything looked the same. The white picket fences, the old mailbox that still leaned to one side outside my ex-wife's house, and then, like some cosmic joke, she appeared. Judy. She was standing by the soccer field, clipboard in hand, her long auburn hair tied in a loose ponytail that danced with the wind. The same woman I had once loved fiercely. The same woman who shattered me. Her gaze flicked up from the field and locked onto mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came. I wasn't sure what I expected. An apology, maybe? Or some look of guilt? But all I got was the weight of our shared history crashing down on me like a freight train. Dad! Sarah's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She bolted from the field, her cleats clacking against the pavement, and threw herself into my arms. I hugged her tightly, inhaling the scent of grass and sunscreen. Hey, kiddo, I murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You're getting taller. You say that every time. She grinned, pulling back to look at me. Are you staying for practice? Yeah, I'll be here. My eyes flicked back to Judy, who was now walking toward us, her expression unreadable as she got closer. I could see the slight twitch in her jaw, a sign she was trying to hold it together. Good. Let her squirm. She deserved that much. Ron, she said, her voice softer than I remembered. Judy. I kept my tone neutral, but inside my pulse was hammering like a war drum. Sarah glanced between us, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Mom's the coach now. Isn't that cool? Cool wasn't the word I'd use, but I nodded anyway. Yeah, sounds great. An awkward silence settled over us before Judy cleared her throat. We should probably get started with warm-ups. You're welcome to stay on the sidelines. I nodded again, watching as she turned and walked back to the field. The way her shoulders tensed told me she was just as thrown off by this reunion as I was. I found a spot near the bleachers and sat, down my mind spinning. Seeing her again was like ripping open an old wound, one that had barely started to heal. 6 years had passed, but it didn't feel like enough. I could still hear the echoes of that night, the shouting, the accusations, the sound of the door slamming behind me as I left. I wasn't ready for this, but I wasn't about to back down either. The build-up as practice dragged on. I couldn't help but notice the way Judy avoided looking in my direction. It was like she was deliberately trying to pretend I wasn't there. But I saw the small signs. The way her fingers fumbled with the whistle around her neck, the way she bit her bottom lip when one of the kids missed a goal. She was nervous. Good. Halfway through practice, Sarah ran over to me, breathless and beaming. Did you see my goal, Dad? You were amazing, I said, ruffling her hair. She beamed before running back to the field. I watched her for a moment, before my gaze shifted back to Judy. She was talking to another parent, a man I didn't recognize, but the way he leaned in close made my stomach churn. Was this her new boyfriend? Had she replaced me that easily? I shook the thought away, trying to focus on anything else. But then, as if the universe wasn't done messing with me, I heard Judy laugh. Not the polite kind you give to a stranger, but the genuine laugh I used to live for, my hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. Suddenly, Memories of that night came flooding back. The way she avoided my questions, the excuses, the late nights she claimed were work-related. I had been blind, desperate, to believe her lies because the alternative was too painful to face. But when I finally caught her, when I saw the texts on her phone from Jack Wilson, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Jack, the man who ruined everything. My jaw tightened as I fought to keep my emotions in check. I hadn't seen Jack since the night I confronted him outside Judy's office, when I nearly broke his nose. He had the nerve to beg me not to tell his wife. I walked away that night, but the anger never left me. It stayed buried, festering like a wound that refused to heal. I wasn't sure what hurt more, Judy's betrayal or the fact that I still cared. Practice finally ended, and parents began gathering their kids. I stood up, intending to leave before Judy could catch me, but fate had other plans. Ron, wait. Her voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. She was standing a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest, as if she was trying to shield herself from the conversation that was about to happen. "We need to talk," she said. I let out a bitter laugh. "Now you want to talk?" She winced, and for a moment I saw the woman I fell in love with, the one who used to sing along to the radio with me on road trips, who cried when Sarah took her first steps. But that woman was a ghost now, buried beneath years of resentment and unanswered questions. "Please, Ron," she whispered. "Just 5 minutes." I hesitated, every instinct telling me to walk away. But something about the way she looked, at me, like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, made me stay. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. 5 minutes. We walked to a quieter spot near the edge of the field, away from prying eyes. She opened her mouth, then closed it as if she didn't know where to start. "Why are you really here?" she finally asked. I narrowed my eyes. "Sarah asked me to be here. That's the only reason." She flinched, and for a split second I felt a twinge of guilt. But then I remembered Jack, the texts, the nights I spent alone wondering what I did wrong. "I know I hurt you," she said softly. The understatement of the century. Before I could respond, she continued, her voice cracking. "But you don't know everything, Ron. You never stayed long enough for me to explain." My stomach twisted. "Explain what? That you cheated on me with Jack Wilson? That you lied to my face for months?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. I couldn't afford to care. Not after everything she put me through. That night you walked out. Her voice trembled. "I didn't think it would be the last time I'd see you." I laughed bitterly. "What did you expect, Judy? That I'd stick around and pretend like nothing happened?" "No," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "But I hoped you'd give me a chance to tell you the truth." I stared at her, my mind racing. Was there more to the story than I knew? Or was this just another one of her manipulations, designed to pull me back in? For the first time since I returned, I wasn't sure what to believe. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. "I hoped you'd give me a chance to tell you the truth." I crossed my arms, the cool breeze brushing against my skin. "And what truth would that be, Judy? That you had to cheat on me? That you didn't mean for it to happen? Or maybe you want to tell me it was all just a misunderstanding? Go ahead, I'm listening." She wiped at her eyes again, but I didn't let that soften me. I'd seen her cry before, when I confronted her the first time, when I left, when the divorce papers were finalized. Back then, her tears had chipped away at my anger, but not anymore. "Jack wasn't supposed to mean anything," she whispered, barely audible. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Well, I guess he meant enough, didn't he?" Judy winced, and, for a moment, I saw her walls crack. She wasn't the composed soccer coach standing before the other parents. She wasn't the woman holding everything together. She was just a mess. The same mess she'd been when she destroyed us. I couldn't help but push further. "So what exactly happened that night, Judy? The night you threw away everything we built together?" Her eyes darted to the field where parents were still, gathering their kids. She lowered her voice. "Can we not do this here, Ron?" I took a step closer, lowering my own voice to a venomous whisper. Why not? Ashamed someone might overhear how you slept with Jack Wilson behind my back? I'm not doing this with you, she said, her voice trembling as she turned on her heel and started walking toward her car. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I followed her, my footsteps heavy on the gravel path. You wanted 5 minutes to... Explain yourself. Here's your chance. She stopped by her car, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the keys. I half expected her to drive off, but instead she leaned against the car door and exhaled sharply. Fine. You want the truth? I'll give it to you. I folded my arms and waited, every nerve in my body on edge. It was one night, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. One stupid, horrible night that I've regretted every single day since. Convenient, I shot back. Funny how regret always shows up after the damage is done. Her face twisted with pain. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had spent 6 years bottling this up, and now that the lid was off, there was no putting it back on. I trusted you, I said, my voice rising. I gave you everything, Judy. A house, a family, a life. And you threw it all away for one night? Tears streamed down her face now, but they didn't move me. If anything, they fueled the fire burning inside me. I didn't plan it, she choked out. I was lonely, Ron. You were working late every night, traveling for work. We barely talked anymore. So, it's my fault? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Let me guess. If I had been home more, you wouldn't have cheated, right? I'm not saying that. She wiped her cheeks, her breath hitching. I'm saying I made a mistake because I was weak, and I've hated myself for it ever since. You should. The words were ice cold, and they hit her like a slap to the face. She pressed her lips together as if she was trying to hold back another wave of sobs. Do you think I don't know what I lost? I loved you, Ron. I still love you. I staggered back, the weight of her confession hitting me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had spent so long hating her, blaming her, that I hadn't considered the possibility that she still cared. But what did it matter now? Love wasn't enough to erase what she did. Don't say that, I whispered. You don't get to say that. She took a step closer, her voice desperate. I do, because it's the truth. I never stopped loving you even after you left. I wanted to fix things, but you wouldn't give me the chance. Fix things. I scoffed. There's no fixing this, Judy. You cheated, you lied, you destroyed everything we had. Because I was scared, she cried, her voice breaking. I was scared you didn't love me anymore. You were always so distant, so focused on work. And when Jack started paying attention to me, Don't you dare put this on me, I interrupted, my anger boiling over. I was working my ass off to give you and Sarah a good life. I wasn't distant. I was trying to make sure we had a future, but you... My voice cracked, and I had to take a breath to steady myself. You couldn't even stay loyal. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. For a moment, I felt the urge to comfort her, but I shoved it down. She didn't deserve my sympathy. I stepped back, my heart pounding. Why Jack? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Of all people, why him? Judy wiped her eyes and looked at me, guilt written all over her face. Because he was there. Because he listened when I needed someone. And I was stupid enough to think that meant something. My stomach turned at the thought of her confiding in him, of him taking advantage of her vulnerability. I wanted to hate her. But in that moment, all I could feel was exhaustion. You let him into our life, I said, my voice hollow. You let him destroy us. She shook her head violently. He didn't destroy us, Ron. I did. I take full responsibility for that. But you walking away without giving me a chance to make things right, that's on you. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. Was she right? Had I been too quick to leave, too stubborn to hear her out? No. I couldn't let her twist this around. I walked away because I couldn't look at you without seeing him, I said, my throat tightening. Do you have any idea what that felt like? I do, she whispered, because every time I look at you, I see the man I broke, and it kills me. The wind picked up, rustling the trees around us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything we'd been holding in was suffocating. Finally, she broke the silence. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve that, but I need you to understand that I never stopped loving you. And if you ever... Her voice cracked again, and she took a shaky breath. If you ever want to try again, I'm here. I stared at her, my mind spinning. Could I forgive her? Could I ever look at her and not see the betrayal? I didn't know. All I knew was that the woman standing in front of me was the same woman I had loved more than anything. And despite everything, a part of me still did. But was that enough? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. I spent the rest of the night lying awake in my hotel room, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying Judy's words over and over. I never stopped loving you. The confession had hit me hard, but the anger simmering beneath it was louder. Love didn't erase betrayal. It didn't undo the nights I stayed up wondering where she was, the humiliation of knowing Jack Wilson had touched what was supposed to be mine. Forgiveness wasn't in the cards, but revenge? That had a certain appeal. I got up at dawn, took a long shower, and made the decision that would change everything. If Judy thought she could waltz back into my life with a sob story and rewrite history, she had another thing coming. She was going to feel what it was, like to lose control, to be blindsided, to have the rug yanked out from under her feet. I had kept tabs on her over the years. Small-town gossip traveled fast, but I'd never done anything with that information. Until now, it was time to hit her where it hurt. The plan was simple, but effective. I knew exactly where to find Jack Wilson, still married to his high school sweetheart Cynthia, and still pretending he was a devoted husband while working late nights. It wasn't hard to set things in motion. One carefully worded message to Cynthia from an anonymous account, attaching a few incriminating details I'd saved from the past, was all it took. By noon, Jack's life was in flames. Cynthia wasn't the kind of woman to suffer in silence. I heard from an old friend that she kicked him out that same evening, throwing his clothes onto the front lawn while the neighbors watched. Perfect. But this wasn't just about Jack. No. This was about Judy, and I wasn't done with her yet. The Christmas party was the perfect setting. It was an annual community event at the town hall, a night where everyone gathered to celebrate, drink spiked eggnog, and pretend life was perfect. I knew Judy would be there. She always volunteered to help organize the event. I arrived fashionably, late, dressed in a sharp suit, the kind I used to wear when I was still the man she respected. I made sure to let her see me as I entered, her eyes widening as she tried to hide her nervousness. Good. Let her sweat. Ron, she said, walking over with that forced smile she wore when she didn't want anyone to know she was cracking inside. You made it. Of course, I said smoothly, taking a sip of my drink. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Her gaze lingered on me, searching for something. Maybe a sign of forgiveness. Maybe a crack in my armor. She wasn't going to find it. As the night wore on, I stayed close enough for her to notice me, but far enough to keep her guessing. I danced with a few women from the community, laughed at jokes, and made sure Judy saw every second of it. But the real show began when Jack Wilson showed up, looking like he'd been dragged through hell. His tie was loose, his hair a mess, and his eyes bloodshot. He wasn't here to celebrate Christmas. He was here to find Judy. I watched from the corner of the room as Jack stormed over to her. Their heated whispers quickly escalated into something louder, drawing the attention of nearby guests. Judy's face turned pale, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. But there was none. I made my way toward them, slow and deliberate, savoring the panic on her face when she saw me approaching. Everything okay here? I asked, feigning concern. Jack glared at me. You did this, didn't you? I smiled, taking another sip of my drink. Did what, Jack? Expose the fact that you're a cheating piece of garbage? You didn't need my help with that. Ron, stop! Judy pleaded, her voice shaking. I turned to her, my expression hardening. Why? Don't you think you deserve this? You played the victim for years, Judy. But the truth is, you're just as guilty as he is. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, I didn't care. She had her chance to cry. Now it was my turn to watch her break. "You think you can just walk back into my life and make me forget what you did?" I continued, my voice cold and steady. "You think a few tears and a confession about still loving me would change anything?" I leaned in closer, just enough for her to hear me over the noise of the party. "You ruined us. Not me. You." She opened her mouth to speak. But Jack cut her off. "I knew this was a bad idea," he muttered before storming off, leaving her standing there humiliated and alone. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Ron, please," she whispered, grabbing my arm. "Can we just go somewhere and talk? Please?" I pulled my arm away. "Talk about what? How you cheated on me and blamed me for it. How you let me walk away without fighting for us because it was easier to play the victim. That's not fair," she said, her voice cracking. "You don't know everything." "No," I said sharply. "But I know enough." I took a step back, letting the weight of my words settle. "You were right about one thing, though. I did walk away. And you know what? That's the best decision I ever made." Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time that night, she looked defeated. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the middle of the crowd, tears streaming down her face. As I reached the exit, I felt a mix of emotions: vindication, satisfaction, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the last remnants of the love I once had for her, finally dying out. The next morning, I packed my bags and checked out of the hotel. Sarah would understand if I left early. I'd call her, explain that work had come up, and promise to see her again soon. As I drove out of town, I thought about everything that had happened. I had gotten my revenge, made Judy feel the same pain she had caused me. But the satisfaction didn't taste as sweet as I imagined. There was a bitterness underneath it, a reminder that no matter how much I had won, some scars never fully healed. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing: I wasn't coming back. Now it was up to Judy to live with the consequences of her actions. And me? I'd finally be free to rebuild my life without her ghost haunting me. But as I crossed the county line, a question lingered in my mind. Was it enough? What do you think? Did I go too far? Or did she deserve every second of it? What would you have done in my shoes?